Tokyo, the night of March 9, 1945. The city was under wartime blackout and curfew. Lights were out, traffic was sparse, and civilians lived under severe restrictions caused by shortages and months of continuous air raid warnings. None of them knew that within a few hours, Tokyo would be subjected to an air attack far beyond anything it had previously endured, the largest incendiary bombing raid in the history of warfare. At the same time, thousands of kilometers south of Tokyo, hundreds of engines of B-29 Superfortress strategic bombers were being started one by one on airfields across the Mariana Islands. Since mid-1944, after capturing Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, the United States had finally secured a forward base close enough to conduct direct air raids against the Japanese home islands. However, the daylight high-altitude bombing tactics used successfully over Europe proved ineffective over Japan. The first bombing raids against Tokyo in late 1944 largely failed to hit their targets. Strong upper-level winds pushed bombs far off course, thick cloud cover disrupted aiming, and many aircraft ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean on their return flights. In early 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay assumed command of the 21st Bomber Command, the primary B-29 force in the Pacific, and quickly implemented a fundamental change in strategy. LeMay ordered an end to high-altitude daylight bombing and shifted to low-altitude nighttime raids at approximately 1,500 to 2,500 meters. The objective was to avoid the jet stream, improve accuracy, and operate below the most effective range of Japanese anti-aircraft guns and fighter interception. At the same time, conventional high-explosive bombs were replaced with napalm-based incendiaries, exploiting a critical vulnerability of Japanese cities. Most buildings were constructed of wood and paper and were highly flammable. To increase bomb loads, LeMay ordered the removal of nearly all defensive gun turrets on the B-29s, retaining only the tail gun, reducing weight, and allowing each aircraft to carry more incendiaries. Before launching a large-scale attack on Tokyo, the United States tested the effectiveness of incendiary bombing. On February 4, 1945, 69 B-29s dropped firebombs on Kobe. On February 25th, 174 B-29s bombed Tokyo from high altitude in daylight, destroying approximately 2.6 square kilometers of the city. The results exceeded those of previous operations and further strengthened LeMay's determination to carry out a much larger attack directly against the Japanese capital. The selected target was the Shitamachi district in eastern Tokyo, a densely populated working-class area with tightly packed wooden housing and a high concentration of small workshops and household industries supplying components to the wartime economy. U.S. intelligence estimated that the area, covering roughly 12 square miles, about 31 square kilometers, was home to approximately 750,000 residents. Natural conditions and defensive weaknesses further increased the risk. Tokyo had just experienced an extended dry period, leaving buildings highly susceptible to fire. Strong northerly winds were forecast to blow throughout the night of March 9th, with gusts exceeding 100 kilometers per hour in some areas. The city's firefighting force numbered only about 8,000 personnel with limited equipment. Across all of Tokyo, only 3 ladder trucks were capable of extended reach. Meanwhile, public air raid shelters were almost non-existent, as authorities feared they would undermine civilian morale. All of these factors combined to make Tokyo, at that moment, an exceptionally vulnerable target, a vast city standing on the brink of ignition in a single night. On the evening of March 9, 1945, the bombing of Tokyo, codenamed Operation Meetinghouse, began. At 5:30 p.m., the first B-29 lifted off from North Field on Guam. It was followed by more than 270 other aircraft departing in sequence from Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, each taking off less than 50 seconds apart. All were heading toward a single destination, Tokyo. In total, 334 B-29s were committed to this mission, making it one of the largest single bomber operations conducted by the U.S. Army Air Forces during the war. To preserve surprise, the bombers did not fly in dense formations. Instead, they dispersed across a wide front, using darkness and flying at low altitude, approximately 1.5 to 3 kilometers, to reduce the chances of early detection by Japanese radar and searchlights. It was not until around 10:30 p.m., when the bomber stream was already nearing the Japanese mainland, that air raid sirens sounded in Tokyo. However, because the city had rarely been attacked at night, many civilians dismissed the warnings and did not seek shelter, partly because public air raid shelters were largely non-existent. Near midnight, Japanese coastal radar stations and visual observers began detecting an unusual heavy engine noise approaching rapidly. The sheer number of aircraft and their unexpected flight altitude caused confusion within the air defense system. Only at 12:15 a.m. on March 10th was a full emergency alert finally issued. By then, it was already too late. Shortly after midnight, the sky over Tokyo suddenly lit up. The first American B-29 Pathfinder aircraft reached the target and began dropping marker incendiaries. Approaching from multiple directions, they laid down incendiaries in the shape of a massive X over the densely populated working-class districts near the waterfront, primarily in the Koto and Chuo areas along the Sumida River and Tokyo Bay. The fiery X quickly became a clear visual reference for the bombers following behind. With their task complete, the Pathfinders withdrew. The main bombing phase began immediately afterward. Wave after wave of B-29s roared over Tokyo, releasing their entire bomb loads onto the marked area below. During the night, approximately 1,665 tons of bombs were dropped on the city, the vast majority of them incendiaries. The primary weapon used was the 500-pound E-46 cluster bomb, each containing 38 M69 napalm bomblets. Dropped from low altitude, the M69s scattered, penetrated thin rooftops or struck the ground, then detonated after a short delay, spraying burning napalm in all directions. Interspersed among them were 100-pound M47 incendiaries filled with jellied gasoline and white phosphorus, which ignited immediately upon impact and created sweeping fireballs through the wooden neighborhoods. Within a short time, fires erupted at tens of thousands of points across the city. During the first 2 hours, the flames spread faster than Tokyo's firefighting forces could respond. Isolated fires merged into a continuous zone of destruction, covering much of the eastern inner city. In effect, a firestorm had formed. Natural winds that night, blowing at speeds of 30 to 45 kilometers per hour, further fed the flames, driving them higher and outward with uncontrollable force. Just 14 minutes after the first bombs fell, Tokyo's firefighting forces were forced to concede total defeat. Reports sent to command described the situation bluntly. A hell of fire had formed beyond any possibility of control. About 1 hour after the bombing began, the flames had already spread beyond the original target area and into neighboring districts. A vast urban expanse was engulfed by continuous fire, precisely matching General Curtis LeMay's calculated expectation of a full-scale firestorm capable of consuming Tokyo. Temperatures within the burning zone rose to levels never previously recorded. Multiple accounts indicated that at the center of the inferno, temperatures reached approximately 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius. The intense heat rose rapidly, generating powerful inward-drawing winds that stripped oxygen from the surrounding air. Many victims died where they stood, suffocated before the flames reached them. Others were killed by the sheer heat. Clothing ignited spontaneously, window glass softened and melted, then shattered, raining down onto the streets. Molten shards struck people attempting to flee, adhering to skin and hair and causing severe burns. Across the city's streets, Tokyo's residents fled in panic. Driven by instinct, many moved toward water, diving into canals, ponds, and rivers in the hope that water might shield them from the fire. That night, even water offered no refuge. At Futaba Girls' School in Honjo Ward, thousands crowded into the brick school complex and descended into the large swimming pool, believing it would provide protection from the heat. By morning, the scene was horrific. Bodies covered the grounds. They were not charred, but killed by heat, frozen in positions showing desperate attempts to reach cooler, lower levels. More than 1,000 bodies were recovered from the bottom of the pool. The water had boiled away completely, turning the pool into a lethal trap that effectively cooked those who sought refuge within it. Elsewhere, desperate crowds poured into the Sumida River and surrounding canals. Many suffocated on the surface as the superheated air contained too little oxygen to breathe. Others drowned after being pushed under by panicked masses. Bodies accumulated and drifted downstream, becoming lodged beneath bridges and forming grotesque human blockages that choked the flow of water. Above the city, B-29s continued to circle the target area for more than an hour, feeding additional incendiaries into the vast fire below. Japanese air defenses responded weakly, exactly as LeMay had anticipated. Some anti-aircraft batteries and searchlights briefly detected American aircraft, but the B-29s were flying too low, too fast, and in overwhelming numbers. Most anti-aircraft fire was ineffective, and Japanese fighter aircraft were largely unable to take off or organize interceptions in the darkness. The greatest danger to the American bomber crews that night did not come from enemy fire, but from the firestorm they themselves had created. The extreme heat generated violent atmospheric turbulence. Many B-29s were shaken violently, experiencing sudden altitude changes of hundreds of meters within seconds as they passed over rising columns of superheated air. Some aircraft were caught in powerful updrafts and rolled inverted. Crews only realized what had happened when loose equipment flew across the cabin and, through the cockpit windows, they saw the inferno that had been below now raging above them. Several B-29s that passed directly through towering columns of smoke and flame were violently thrown off course, with turbulence posing a greater threat than Japanese defenses. When bomb bay doors were opened to release the final loads, many pilots reported an overwhelming stench flooding into the cockpit. Smoke from the burning city rose thousands of meters into the air, carrying with it the smell of human flesh. The odor clung to flight suits, equipment, and aircraft interiors. And days after returning to base, it still had not fully faded. At dawn on March 10, 1945, the sky over Tokyo was still glowing red, but the last B-29s had already withdrawn after completing their bombing runs. Fires continued to smolder across the city for days before finally dying out. When daylight came on the morning of March 10th, Tokyo appeared erased. Vast urban areas had been reduced to ash, rubble, and drifting smoke. What had once been homes, temples, and workshops was now an expanse of blackened ground stretching as far as the eye could see. Bodies lay scattered throughout the streets. Many had died while trying to escape. Countless victims were burned so completely that only ash-like human shapes remained. In some areas, charred bodies were piled as high as 2 meters, formed as people collapsed on top of one another with no route of escape. Rivers and canals running through the city were filled with floating corpses. It is estimated that around 100,000 Tokyo civilians were killed in a single night. The exact number has remained debated ever since, but most studies place the death toll between 80,000 and over 100,000, with approximately 40,000 injured and more than 1 million people left homeless by this single firebombing. It is widely regarded as the deadliest air raid in world history. The material destruction inflicted on Tokyo was immense. Approximately 15.8 square miles, about 41 square kilometers, of the city were completely destroyed. Eastern Tokyo districts, where dense residential neighborhoods and networks of small household industries were concentrated, were nearly wiped off the map. Post-raid assessments recorded roughly 267,000 buildings destroyed. More than 1 million residents were rendered homeless overnight. Industrial output across Tokyo dropped by at least 50%, as most small-scale production facilities embedded within residential areas were burned to the ground. The psychological impact on Japanese society was equally profound. For the first time since the war began, many Tokyo residents believed that the Japanese Empire could no longer defend itself. Faith in government assurances and slogans promising a final victory began to collapse. The Tokyo Inferno became undeniable proof that the war had entered a new and devastating phase. On the American side, U.S. Army Air Forces Command received the results with clear satisfaction. B-29 crews returned to their bases in the Mariana Islands on the morning of March 10th, carrying with them the smell of the burning city, still clinging to their flight gear and aircraft interiors. In total, the United States lost approximately 14 B-29s during the operation, some to anti-aircraft fire, others to accidents and severe atmospheric turbulence caused by the firestorm. Around 90 American airmen were recorded as killed or missing, a relatively small loss compared to the destruction inflicted. General Curtis LeMay and U.S. Army Air Forces Chief of Staff Hap Arnold hailed the operation as a decisive success and a clear demonstration of the effectiveness of B-29 area bombing strategy. The objective of destroying Tokyo's network of household-based war production had been achieved in a single night. This success accelerated the expansion of similar operations across Japan. In the weeks that followed, major cities such as Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe suffered comparable incendiary raids. In the months thereafter, more than 60 Japanese cities were devastated by air attacks, resulting in hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths and millions left homeless. The strategic bombing campaign only ended when Japan stood on the brink of total collapse. On August 6th and August 9th, 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Faced with unprecedented destruction, from incendiary raids that erased cities to nuclear weapons that annihilated them outright, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945, bringing World War II to an end. Owing in part to the sustained bombing campaign over the preceding months, the Allied powers did not have to carry out a planned invasion of the Japanese home islands, an operation expected to cost millions of lives on both sides. To this day, the Tokyo firebombing of March 9th to 10th, 1945, is recognized as the most destructive aerial bombardment in human history. The scale of devastation and loss of life exceeded that of any other bombing campaign during World War II. When measured over a single night, the death toll in Tokyo surpassed that caused by either atomic bomb individually. For this reason, the event remains the subject of intense ethical debate. Many historians and critics argue that the deliberate incineration of a city filled with civilians constituted a grave violation of humanitarian principles, and possibly a war crime. Regardless of how history ultimately judges it, the Tokyo firestorm stands as a stark reminder of the immense human cost of modern warfare, an enduring warning of the devastation war inflicts on civilian populations.